in any private voluntary economic undertaking, we have three sets of beneficiaries. We have the producer himself, his customers, and his suppliers. These are three sets of parties benefiting. Now, there might be some outside party who possibly might suffer some harm. And what I always think of as an example, I remember when I went to graduate school, we had a very old building, I mentioned that last night, and they were starting to construct a new building right across the street. But the construction of the new building was delayed for quite a while because the owner of an adjacent building where they were excavating the foundation claimed that the excavation was jeopardizing the foundation of her building. And so she got a court restraining order until that could be worked out. So this was an outside party who was threatened with some harm. Well, whenever there is some outside party who is threatened with harm by the voluntary actions of the producer, his suppliers, and customers, if there is something demonstrable, that party has a legal remedy. But the environmentalists are not concerned with cases like that. Their focus is cases where there is no such outside party, no one who can present any kind of recognizable grievance. What they specialize in is cases in which the different individuals involved are not producing any perceptible negative effects on anybody. They're just benefiting themselves and those with whom they deal. But if you add up the actions of millions of such cases, maybe there is some negative that now adds up to something. In effect, we have gallons and gallons of good and maybe tiny microscopic droplets of bad that no one can perceive. But when we multiply these transactions by a sufficiently large number, the tiny microscopic droplets of bad now add up to a quart of bad. Well, and now the environmentalists jump in and they zero in on that quart and they want to stop the production of all of the hundreds and thousands of millions of gallons of good. And let me give you a hypothetical example of this. 150 years ago or so, the American Midwest was being settled. And as hundreds of thousands of farmers and their families moved west, they cut down an awful lot of trees. They cleared land to establish farms. Now, it may be that when you clear so much land of so many trees, that the water no longer had enough place to go, and so maybe the Mississippi River now had to carry more water downstream. And maybe this caused some additional flooding down at New Orleans. Well, now notice, no individual farmer and his family, is he responsible for flooding down at New Orleans? No, but if you have millions of them, well, maybe now some floods result. Well, if we had had an environmental movement back in those days, they would have tried to stop the development of the Midwest in order to avoid the flooding down at New Orleans. And they would have held all of the farmers responsible for that negative environmental impact. Well, I think that's exactly the same situation with global warming. We have hundreds of millions of people going about their business, benefiting themselves, those with whom they deal, and maybe, I don't think it's proved, but let's concede it for the sake of argument, that the byproduct of all of this activity may be that the mean temperature of the world will be a little bit higher than it otherwise would have been. And the environmentalists zero in on that. They ignore the totality of all of the homes, automobiles, light, power, whatever that underlies this, and they focus only on the negative of the higher temperature and whatever might go with it. And then they think, voila, it follows, we have the right to demand an immediate 60% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions. So they assume that the individuals are responsible and therefore they have a right to stop them. Now, I would suggest that the appropriate procedure in such cases, whether it's global warming or flooding down at New Orleans or whatever, is when you can't show that individuals are responsible for any perceptible negative effects, but it's only great masses of people acting separately and independently, we should regard those negative outcomes as the equivalent of acts of nature. Nature causes flooding. Nature can change the temperature. Sooner or later, nature all by itself will make the temperature warmer or colder. So if we have unintended byproducts of the action of masses of human beings, I would say the reasonable way to regard that is as the equivalent of an act of nature, and then we should respond as we would to any other act of nature. And maybe we need to have more air conditioners to deal with global warming, more sunblock, whatever. Also, what you need, the real solution, once you view it as needing to respond to an act of nature, the basic solution is going to be economic freedom. You see, the problem can be solved if nature is changing the climate. We will solve the problem if we are all individually free to respond in a way that is best for us. So farmers may have to change the crops they're growing. Some areas will become better for some things, others will be poorer for other things. People may need to relocate factories or whatever. There might be some parts of the world that can't support so much population, but then central Canada would open up, southern Greenland, parts of the former Soviet Union. There'd be a changed set of circumstances, and the way to deal with that is not by global government control. They've tried that. They can't grow enough wheat or produce enough nails. Don't let the same people attempt to solve the problem of global warming or anything of that kind. And this is where they're collectivist again. They view a problem. They see a problem and they think, oh my God, some official in a bureau in Washington needs to solve this. How can this be done? It's overwhelming. Well, imagine that we had viewed other problems that way. Suppose we put ourselves back about 105 years and we start to realize, the automobile is coming. Right now, there's only a handful of them, but there's going to be millions of automobiles. And we're going to need incredible highways. And the horses, what's going to happen to all the horse breeders, the oat growers, the blacksmiths? How are we going to adjust to this? This is a terrible calamity. Or agriculture is going to decline. We have 60% of the population living in agriculture, but in 100 years, we're only going to have 3%. Where are these people going to go? Who's going to feed them? Well, you see, it's looking at things from a collectivist mentality. And I'd say the whole problem of global warming and all of these other things, there might be some actual physical issue involved, but there is no real problem. The real problem is a collectivist mentality. It's too big a problem for any government bureaucrat to cope with. But if you have hundreds of millions of free individuals, each one seeking to solve his particular part, do what's best for him, that's how we solve the problems. It gets all integrated and harmonized through the price system.